Sometimes the things we save end up saving us right back. For 30 years, Shiloh Creede has lived alone in the Idaho mountains, carrying wounds that never quite healed and nursing regrets she can't seem to shake. At 59, she's convinced herself that solitude is safer than trust, that distance protects her from the pain people always seem to bring. Then one frozen morning, she finds a dying wolf in the snow, shot and bleeding, barely clinging to life. What happens next will change everything Shiloh thought she knew about second chances and belonging. But here's what nobody expected, not even Shiloh herself. Could saving this wounded animal be the key to healing the parts of herself she thought were broken beyond repair? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin stood where Shiloh had built it 3 decades ago, nestled in a clearing surrounded by ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, high enough in the Idaho panhandle that most folks gave up trying to find it. She'd chosen this spot deliberately, far from roads, far from neighbors, far from the voices that asked questions she didn't want to answer. The logs she'd cut and notched herself, each beam positioned with the kind of precision that comes from needing the work to mean something. The roof didn't leak. The door hung straight. The windows faced east to catch the morning sun that would warm the single room before the wood stove needed stoking. It was enough. It had always been enough. Shiloh woke before dawn on that February morning, same as every other morning for the past 30 years. The cold pressed against the windows, turning them opaque with frost. She lay under 3 quilts she'd sewn from old wool blankets, listening to the silence that only deep winter brings to the mountains. No birds yet, no wind, just the faint creak of settling timber and her own breathing, steady and deliberate. She rose at 5:30, dressed in layers thermal underwear, wool pants, flannel shirt, thick socks, and lit the wood stove with kindling she'd prepared the night before. The fire caught quickly, the way it does when you've been doing it long enough to know exactly how much paper, how much pitch, how much air. While the cabin warmed, she stood at the window and watched the darkness thin to grey, then to the pale blue that comes before sunrise in winter. The thermometer outside read 8 degrees. Cold, but not dangerously so. She'd seen it drop to 25 below, seen mornings when her breath froze on her scarf before she'd walked 10 feet from the door. This was just February in the high country. This was normal. She made coffee in an old percolator on the wood stove. No electricity this far out, no need for it. The smell filled the cabin, rich and bitter and familiar. While it brewed, she pulled on her boots and stepped outside to check the weather. The sky was clear, crystalline, the kind of cold that makes everything sharp-edged and immediate. Snow covered the ground in a thick blanket, undisturbed except for the tracks of small animals, rabbits, squirrels, the delicate prints of a pine marten that had crossed her clearing sometime in the night. Shiloh had been a wildlife tracker once, back when she had a different life. Back when she worked for the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, spending weeks at a time in the backcountry, monitoring wolf populations and migration patterns. She'd been good at it, better than good. She could read a landscape the way some people read books, seeing stories in broken branches and compressed snow, in scat and scratch marks and the angle of disturbed earth. She'd loved that work. Loved the solitude, the purpose, the feeling that she was part of something larger than herself. She'd tracked wolves through some of the most remote wilderness in the lower 48, documenting pack, structures and territory boundaries, helping develop conservation strategies that actually worked. For 15 years, she'd been one of the most respected field researchers in the region. Then everything fell apart. Her husband, Tom, died suddenly, a heart attack at 47 while he was splitting firewood behind their house in Coeur d'Alene. She'd been in the field when it happened, 3 weeks into a tracking expedition. By the time they reached her with the news, he'd already been dead for 5 days. Their daughter, Lindsay, only 5 years old, had stayed with Tom's parents, while Shiloh rushed home to a funeral she'd missed and a life that no longer made sense. She tried to keep working, tried to be the mother Lindsay needed, tried to hold together the pieces of a world that had shattered. But grief did something to her, hollowed her out, made her afraid of everything she couldn't control. She started turning down field assignments, then stopped going into the office altogether. She'd look at Lindsay and see Tom's eyes, his stubborn chin, and the pain would hit her so hard she couldn't breathe. 6 months after Tom died, Shiloh made a choice she'd regretted every day since. She left Lindsay with Tom's parents, good people, stable people, and drove north into the mountains. She told herself it was temporary, that she just needed time to heal, to figure out how to be whole again. She told herself she'd come back when she was stronger. She never did. Instead, she found this piece of land, unclaimed and forgotten, high enough that the snow stayed deep from November through April. She spent that first summer building the cabin, working dawn to dusk, letting exhaustion replace thought. By the time winter came again, she had walls and a roof and a door that locked. She had a place where no one would ask her to be anything other than what she was: broken, ashamed, and determined to stay that way. 30 years. That's how long it had been since she'd walked away from her daughter. Lindsay would be 35 now, a full-grown woman with a life Shiloh knew nothing about. She'd sent money over the years, anonymous cashier's checks mailed from various post offices, but never a letter, never a phone call. Tom's parents had tried to reach her at first, but she'd made it clear she didn't want to be found. Eventually, they stopped trying. The people in the valley below, the few who knew she existed, called her the Hermit Woman, or that crazy tracker lady who lives up by Granite Peak. She came down twice a year to trade for supplies, speaking as little as possible, paying cash, and leaving before anyone could engage her in conversation. They'd learned to leave her alone. She poured coffee into a tin cup and stood on her porch, watching the sun break over the eastern ridge. The light hit the snow and turned it gold, then white, then blinding. This was her world now, just her, and the trees and the animals that moved through the forest like ghosts. She knew the patterns of this place better than she'd ever known anything human. She could tell when the elk were moving to lower elevations, when the black bears were denning up for winter, when the mountain lions were hunting the ridgelines, and she knew the wolves. There were 3 packs in her territory, she'd estimated, though she hadn't actively tracked them in years. She heard them sometimes at night, their howls carrying through the cold air, and she'd lie in bed listening, remembering what it felt like to care about their survival. She'd see their tracks occasionally, large and distinct in fresh snow, and she'd follow them for a while, old habits surfacing before she'd catch herself and turn back. She didn't track anymore, didn't document, didn't intervene, didn't engage. She just lived, day after day, season after season, in the small, contained world she'd built for herself. It was enough. It had to be enough. Because the alternative, facing what she'd done, facing the daughter she'd abandoned, facing the person she'd become, was too much to bear. Shiloh finished her coffee and went back inside. She had work to do, firewood to split, water to haul from the spring, traps to check for the rabbits and grouse that supplemented her diet. The days were short this time of year, and she'd learned to use every hour of daylight. By nightfall, she'd be exhausted enough to sleep without dreaming, which was all she really wanted anymore. She pulled on her heavy coat, a canvas work jacket lined with wool, and wrapped a scarf around her face. Her rifle hung by the door, a .30-06. She carried more for peace of mind than necessity. In 30 years, she'd never had to use it on anything larger than a coyote getting too interested in her food stores. Outside, the day had warmed to maybe 15 degrees. She walked the perimeter of her clearing, checking for any signs of disturbance. Everything looked normal, just her tracks from the previous day, already partially filled with wind-blown snow, and the same small animal trails she'd seen that morning. But then she heard it. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Gunshots. 3 of them, spaced evenly, coming from the northwest, maybe 2 miles away. Then, silence. Shiloh stood very still, listening. Gunshots weren't uncommon during hunting season, but it was February. Nothing was in season. Nothing legal anyway. She waited, but no more shots came. The forest settled back into its winter quiet, and after a few minutes she convinced herself it was nothing. Maybe someone target shooting or taking care of a predator threatening livestock in the valley below. It wasn't her concern. Nothing out here was her concern anymore. She went back to her work, splitting wood until her shoulders ached and sweat dampened her thermal layer despite the cold. By midday, she'd restocked her woodpile and hauled enough water to last 3 days. She ate a simple lunch, dried venison and hardtack, and sat by the window with a book she'd read a dozen times before. But she couldn't focus. Something nagged at her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Unease, curiosity, the sense that something was wrong in the forest around her. Just before 3 o'clock, when the sun was already dropping toward the western peaks, she heard them. Howls. Not the usual evening chorus of a pack marking territory, but something else, something desperate and pained. Shiloh set down her book and listened. The howls came again, weaker this time, from the same direction as the gunshots. Northwest, up toward the ridgeline, where the granite outcrops broke through the tree cover. She knew she should stay put. Whatever was happening out there wasn't her business. She'd given up being a tracker, given up caring about wildlife she couldn't save, and problems she couldn't solve. She'd built this life specifically to avoid getting involved in anything that would require her to feel again. But the howls came a third time, and before she could talk herself out of it, Shiloh was pulling on her boots and reaching for her coat. Some instincts run too deep to bury. Shiloh moved through the forest with the efficiency of someone who'd spent half her life in places like this. The snow was deep mid-thigh in places where it had drifted, but she knew how to walk without exhausting herself, how to read the terrain and find the paths of least resistance. Her breath came out in white clouds that froze on her scarf. The temperature was dropping as the sun lowered, probably down to 5 degrees now, maybe less. She followed the sound of the howls, which had stopped but left an echo in her memory, a directional beacon. Northwest, up the ridge, past the dense stand of lodgepole pine, where she'd seen a mountain lion kill site last autumn. The going was steep, and her thighs burned with the effort, but she didn't slow down. After 40 minutes, she found the blood. It started as small drops, dark against the white snow, easy to miss if you weren't looking. Then more, a scattered trail that became a steady line, then a drag mark where something heavy had been pulled or had crawled through the powder. Shiloh knelt and examined it. Fresh, within the last few hours, a lot of blood too much for whatever had left it to survive long without help. She followed the trail. It led up an incline, through a narrow gap between 2 granite boulders, and into a small clearing surrounded by young aspens. That's where she found her. The wolf lay on her side in the snow, her black fur matted with blood that had frozen in dark, crystalline patches. She was a big female, probably 90 pounds, maybe more. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, each exhale producing a small cloud that dissipated immediately in the cold. Her eyes were open but unfocused, glazed with pain and shock. Shiloh approached slowly, speaking in low, steady tones. "Easy now. Easy. I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf's ears twitched, but she didn't have the strength to lift her head. Shiloh could see at least 3 entry wounds buckshot, from the pattern and size. One in the left shoulder, one in the flank, and one that had torn through the meat of her hind leg. Not immediately fatal, but in this cold, with that much blood loss, the wolf would be dead within an hour. Maybe less. Shiloh knew she should walk away. This was nature taking its course. Wolves died all the time from starvation, from territorial fights, from hunters protecting livestock. One dying wolf shouldn't matter to her. She'd hardened herself against caring about things like this years ago, but she couldn't move. She knelt in the snow beside the wolf and placed a hand gently on her neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath the fur. The wolf's eyes shifted, found her face, and for a moment they stared at each other. The wolf didn't snarl or try to bite. She just looked at Shiloh with an expression that seemed almost resigned, almost grateful that she wouldn't die alone. "Damn it," Shiloh whispered. She stood and assessed the situation. The wolf was too heavy to carry easily, especially through deep snow and up a steep incline, but leaving her here meant certain death. The temperature would hit 0 after sunset. Even if the blood loss didn't kill her, hypothermia would. Shiloh made her decision without allowing herself to think about it too much. She took off her coat and spread it in the snow beside the wolf. Then, with considerable effort and more strength than she thought she still possessed, she rolled the wolf onto the coat and wrapped it around her as best she could. The wolf whimpered, but didn't struggle. The trip back to the cabin was brutal. Shiloh fashioned a makeshift travois using fallen branches and paracord she kept in her pack, tied the coat-wrapped wolf onto it, and began the slow, agonizing process of dragging 90 pounds of dead weight through miles of mountainous terrain. Her shoulders screamed. Her back felt like it might give out. Sweat soaked through her layers despite the freezing temperature, and every few minutes she had to stop and rest, gasping for air in the thin, cold atmosphere. By the time she reached her clearing, full darkness had fallen. The temperature had dropped to below 0, and her muscles were trembling with exhaustion. She dragged the travois up onto her porch and through the door, leaving a trail of snow and blood across her clean floor. The wolf was still breathing. Barely. Shiloh lit every lamp she had and stoked the fire until the cabin was almost too warm. She laid the wolf on a blanket near the stove and began assessing the damage in better light. The wounds were worse than she'd thought. The buckshot had fragmented, leaving multiple entry points and embedding pellets deep in muscle tissue. She'd need to clean and debride the wounds, remove what pellets she could reach, and hope infection didn't set in. She had veterinary supplies left over from her. Tracking days, antibiotics, surgical tools, sutures, bandages. She'd kept them maintained out of habit more than necessity, never thinking she'd actually use them again. Now she laid everything out on her table and began the painstaking work of trying to save a life she'd found bleeding in the snow. It took 3 hours. She cleaned each wound with antiseptic, removed 7 pellets with forceps, stitched the worst lacerations, and bandaged everything she could reach. The wolf remained unconscious through most of it, which was a mercy. When Shiloh finally finished, her hands were shaking and covered in blood, and she had no idea if anything she'd done would make a difference. She cleaned up, washed her hands, and sat back against the wall, watching the wolf's chest rise and fall in shallow, irregular breaths. The animal might not survive the night, probably wouldn't, given the trauma and blood loss. But at least she'd tried. At least she'd done something other than walk away. That's when she heard the scratching at her door. Shiloh stood slowly, every muscle protesting, and moved to the window. She pulled back the curtain and looked out into the darkness. 4 small shapes huddled on her porch, their eyes reflecting the lamplight from inside. Wolf pups. They couldn't have been more than 4 months old, still awkward and gangly, their fur thick but their bodies thin. They must have followed the scent of their mother through the forest, tracking her all the way to this strange wooden den that smelled of smoke and human. Shiloh opened the door. The pups scattered backward, frightened but not fleeing entirely. They watched her with wide, uncertain eyes, their breath clouding in the frigid air. Without their mother, without a den, they'd freeze to death before morning. She stepped aside and held the door open. "Come on, then. Get in here before you turn into ice." The pups hesitated, whining softly. Then the boldest one, a male with a white patch on his chest, took a tentative step forward. When nothing bad happened, he crept across the threshold. The others followed, tumbling over each other in their haste to get inside where it was warm. They found their mother immediately, surrounding her, nuzzling her face and whimpering. The wolf's eyes opened slightly, and she lifted her head just enough to lick the nearest pup. The effort seemed to exhaust her, and her head dropped back to the blanket. Shiloh closed the door and leaned against it, looking at the scene in her cabin: a dying wolf, 4 terrified pups, blood on her floor, and the peaceful solitude she'd maintained for 3 decades completely shattered. She should have kept walking when she heard those howls. She should have stayed in her cabin with her book and her carefully controlled world. She should have learned by now that caring about anything, saving anything, only leads to more pain. But as she watched the pups curl up against their mother's body, seeking warmth and comfort and the dished reassurance that they weren't alone, something shifted inside her. Something she'd thought was dead a long time ago. "Well," she said to the wolves, her voice rough with exhaustion, "I guess we're in this together now." Outside, the temperature continued to drop. Inside, the fire burned steady and warm. And for the first time in 30 years, Shiloh Creede's cabin held more than just one stubborn, broken woman trying to hide from the world. It held something worth protecting. The wolf survived the night. Shiloh woke at dawn to find her still breathing, her chest rising and falling with more strength than it had the evening before. The pups were tangled together in a pile near their mother, sleeping the deep, twitching sleep of young animals who'd finally found safety. The cabin was warm, the fire reduced to glowing coals, and everything smelled like wet fur and antiseptic. Shiloh stood slowly, careful not to disturb anyone, and added wood to the stove. While the fire caught and the cabin warmed, she assessed her patient in better light. The wolf's eyes were closed, but when Shiloh touched her gently, checking for fever, the eyes opened and tracked her movement. There was awareness there now, and something else, not trust exactly, but a recognition that this human had helped rather than harmed. "You're tougher than you look," Shiloh said quietly. "That's good. You're going to need to be." She checked the bandages. Some bleeding had seeped through overnight, but less than she'd expected. The wounds weren't infected yet, though the next 48 hours would be critical. She'd need to keep them clean, change the dressings twice a day, and make sure the wolf stayed warm and hydrated. And then there were the pups. They woke as the cabin brightened, stretching and yawning with needle-sharp puppy teeth. They were wary of Shiloh at first, pressing against their mother and watching the human with wide, uncertain eyes. But hunger and curiosity eventually won out. The boldest pup, the one with the white chest patch, ventured closer, sniffing Shiloh's hand when she held it out. "You're a brave one," she told him. "That's going to get you in trouble someday." The pups needed food. Their mother couldn't nurse in her current condition, and even if she could, she wasn't producing enough milk after the trauma and blood loss. Shiloh had dried venison and some canned goods, but wolf pups needed more than that. They needed protein, fat, nutrients that would help them grow. She spent the morning improvising. She had powdered milk, the kind made for camping, and she mixed it with warm water and some of the venison fat she'd rendered weeks ago. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. She poured the mixture into a shallow bowl and set it near the pups. They approached cautiously, sniffing, then one dipped her nose in and lapped tentatively. The others followed, and within minutes the bowl was empty, and 4 small wolves were licking their chops and looking at her expectantly. "That's all for now," Shiloh said. "You'll make yourselves sick if you eat too fast." She made more throughout the day, feeding them small amounts every few hours. By evening, they'd stopped being quite so afraid of her. They still kept their distance, still watched her with that wild wariness that wolves never quite lose, but they'd stopped flinching when she moved. The mother wolf was another matter. Shiloh managed to get some water into her using a turkey baster, dribbling it slowly into the side of her mouth. The wolf swallowed reflexively, though she was too weak to drink on her own. Keeping her hydrated would be crucial. Dehydration killed more injured animals than the injuries themselves. As the days passed, a routine developed. Shiloh woke before dawn, tended the fire, checked the wolf's bandages, and fed the pups. She'd clean the wounds, apply fresh antiseptic, and watch for any signs of infection. The pups grew bolder, exploring the cabin with increasing confidence, chewing on things they shouldn't and wrestling with each other near the wood stove. On the third day, the mother wolf lifted her head on her own and drank from the water bowl Shiloh placed nearby. It was a small victory, but it meant something. It meant she might actually survive. Shiloh found herself talking to them, not in the way someone talks to a pet, but in the way you talk to another living being when you've been alone for too long. She explained what she was doing as she changed bandages, narrated her day as she worked around the cabin, told stories from her tracking days when the silence got too heavy. "I knew a wolf once," she said one evening, sitting by the fire while the pups dozed nearby. "Big male, probably 120, 130. He had this scar across his muzzle from a territorial fight. I tracked him for 2 winters, learned his patterns, his territory. He was smart, avoided the usual routes, kept his pack away from livestock, stayed in the high country where humans didn't go much." The mother wolf's ears twitched, like she was listening. "I used to think I understood wolves," Shiloh continued. "Thought I knew what they needed, how they lived, what they were thinking. But the truth is, I only ever saw the surface. You can spend your whole life studying something and never really know it." She paused, staring into the fire. "Same with people, I guess. The pups were growing. In just a week, they'd gained weight, their coats had thickened, and they'd become less tentative in their movements. They played more, fought more, explored every corner of the cabin with the fearless curiosity of young animals who'd never been hurt by the world." Shiloh named them, though she told herself it was just for practical purposes to tell them apart. The bold male with the white chest became Bandit. The smallest female, who was always getting bullied by her siblings, became Whisper. The largest pup, a female with unusually dark fur, became Storm. And the quietest one, a male who watched everything with patient, intelligent eyes, became Scout. She told herself not to get attached. These were wild animals, not pets. As soon as the mother was strong enough, as soon as the pups were old enough, she'd release them back into the forest where they belonged. Getting attached would only make that harder. But late at night, when the cabin was dark and quiet except for the soft breathing of wolves, Shiloh would lie in her bed and feel something she hadn't felt in 30 years. She felt needed. The mother wolf grew stronger each day. By the end of the 2nd week, she could stand on her own, though she still limped heavily on the wounded hind leg. She watched Shiloh constantly now, tracking her movements with an intelligence that was almost unsettling. There was no aggression in her gaze, but there was assessment. She was deciding whether this human could be trusted. One morning, Shiloh woke to find the wolf standing by the window, looking out at the snow-covered clearing. The pups were still asleep, and the cabin was quiet, except for the crackling fire. Shiloh sat up slowly, careful not to startle her. "You want to go back out there," she said. "I understand, but you're not ready yet. Another week, maybe 2. You need to be strong enough to hunt, to protect them." The wolf turned her head and looked at Shiloh for a long moment. Then she limped back to the blanket where her pups slept and lay down beside them. "I'll call you Shadow," Shiloh said. "You move like one, quiet, always watching." Shadow closed her eyes, but her ears stayed alert, tracking every sound in the cabin. That afternoon, Shiloh ventured outside for the first time in days. She needed supplies, more food, more firewood, more of everything now that she was feeding 5 extra mouths. The snow had softened slightly, suggesting a brief warming trend, and the sky was that brilliant blue you only see in mountain winters. She was splitting wood when she heard it. Distant but distinct. Gunfire. 3 shots, evenly spaced, from somewhere to the northeast. Then silence. Shiloh lowered the axe and listened. Her chest tightened with a familiar dread. Those shots were too measured, too deliberate to be random. Someone was hunting. And given that it was still winter, given that nothing was in season, they were hunting illegally. She thought about Shadow, about the buckshot wounds, about the desperate howls that had led her to a dying wolf in the snow. Someone was killing wolves, and based on what she'd just heard, they weren't planning to stop. 3 weeks after Shiloh carried Shadow home through the snow, Roy Hemlock came knocking on her door. She heard his truck long before it arrived, the distinctive rattle of a 20-year-old Ford with a bad muffler and worse shocks, grinding its way up the old logging road that dead-ended half a mile from her cabin. Most people didn't know that road existed. Roy was one of the few who did. Shiloh stepped outside before he could reach the porch. The wolves were inside, and she wanted to keep it that way. Roy was decent enough, as people went, but even decent people talked, and she couldn't afford anyone knowing what she was harboring. Roy climbed out of his truck, a man in his mid-60s with a weathered face and the kind of lean, rangy build that came from decades of hard work. He wore a canvas coat with a fleece collar and a baseball cap, advertising a feed store that had closed 10 years ago. He raised a hand in greeting, then reached into the truck bed and pulled out a cardboard box. "Brought your supplies," he called. "Figured you'd be running low by now." Shiloh walked down to meet him, keeping herself between Roy and the cabin. "I didn't order anything." "I know, but I had extra, and I was coming up this way anyway." He set the box on the tailgate. Canned goods mostly, some coffee, flour, sugar, few other things. She peered into the box. It was more than extra, it was a full resupply, probably $60 worth of goods. Roy ran a small trading post in the valley, selling supplies to the scattered homesteaders and off-grid folks who lived in the area. He'd been Shiloh's main contact with the outside world for years, coming by a few times each season to trade goods for the cash she paid him. "I'll pay you," she said. "I know you will. No rush." He leaned against the truck, studying the sky like he was checking for weather. "Been hearing things lately." "Thought you should know." Shiloh waited. Roy wasn't one for small talk, and if he'd driven all the way up here outside his normal schedule, he had something specific to say. "There's a developer named of Garrett Spence buying up land in the valley," Roy said. "Big parcels, mostly old timber holdings. He's planning some kind of resort development. High-end, from what I hear. Cabins, lodges, the whole thing. That's a long way from here. Maybe not." Roy pulled a folded map from his pocket and spread it on the tailgate. It was a topographic map of the region, marked with red circles and lines. "These are the parcels he's bought so far. See how they're positioned? He's creating a corridor, buying everything between the valley floor and the high ridges. Your land falls right in the middle of it." Shiloh studied the map. Roy was right, the red marks formed a rough semicircle that would encompass her territory if the pattern continued. "I don't own this land, it's national forest." "Technically, yes, but Spence has friends in the State House, and he's pushing for a land exchange. Swap some of his holdings elsewhere for public land here. If it goes through, you'd be surrounded by private property, and he could make things difficult. I've been here 30 years. No one's bothered me yet." "Times are changing." Roy folded the map. "There's something else. Spence is running a bounty program, unofficial, but everyone knows about it. $500 per wolf pelt, no questions asked. Says they're threatening his investment, driving off wildlife, making the area unsafe for tourists." Shiloh felt something cold settle in her chest. Wolves are protected. On paper, sure. But proving who shot what and when is hard in country like this. Spence's people are careful. They stage it to look like livestock defense or self-protection. By the time anyone investigates, there's nothing to find. "How many has he killed?" "I don't know exact numbers, but I've heard talk. Enough that some of the old conservation folks are getting worried." Roy met her eyes. "I saw wolf tracks near your cabin just now, fresh ones. Figured you should know what you're dealing with." Shiloh kept her face neutral. "I'll be careful." "You do that." Roy climbed back into his truck, then paused with his hand on the door. "For what it's worth, I think what Spence is doing is wrong, but he's got money and influence. and people like us don't count for much against that. Just watch yourself. After Roy left, Shiloh carried the box of supplies inside. Shadow was standing by the door, alert and tense, having heard the truck and voices. The pups huddled behind her, unsure whether to be curious or afraid. "It's all right," Shiloh told them. "He's gone." But it wasn't all right. Roy's news had confirmed what she'd feared since hearing those gunshots weeks ago. Someone was systematically killing wolves, and the woman who'd once dedicated her life to protecting them was hiding in a cabin with a wolf family that would be worth $500 to the right or wrong kind of person. She thought about the buckshot wounds that had nearly killed Shadow, thought about the deliberate spacing of recent gunfire, thought about a wealthy developer who saw wolves as obstacles to profit. For 30 years, Shiloh had avoided getting involved in anything beyond her immediate survival. She'd walked away from her work, her family, her responsibilities, and built a life based on the principle that if you didn't care about anything, nothing could hurt you. But now she had 4 wolf pups wrestling on her floor, and a healing she-wolf watching her with eyes that held something like trust. She had a problem she couldn't ignore, and a choice she didn't want to make. That evening, after she'd fed the wolves and changed Shadow's bandages, now mostly healed, the wounds pink and healthy, Shiloh dug through an old trunk in the corner of her cabin. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside were remnants of her old life, her fish and game credentials, expired but still valid-looking, topographic maps of the region, field journals filled with decades-old notes about wolf populations and movement patterns, and at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, a satellite phone she'd kept charged out of habit more than hope. She sat by the fire and stared at the phone for a long time. Using it meant reconnecting with a world she'd left behind. It meant getting involved, taking action, possibly putting herself at risk. It meant caring about something beyond the walls of her cabin. Shadow limped over and sat beside her, close enough that Shiloh could feel the warmth of her body. The wolf looked at the phone, then at Shiloh, then back at the phone, as if she understood the significance of what that small device represented. "I don't know if I can do this," Shiloh said quietly. "I've spent 30 years learning not to care, learning to be alone, learning to let the world handle itself without me." Shadow laid her head on Shiloh's knee. It was the first time the wolf had initiated contact, the first gesture of trust beyond simple acceptance. Shiloh placed her hand on Shadow's head, feeling the coarse fur, the solid bone beneath, the steady warmth of a living creature who'd survived against terrible odds. "But I guess some things are worth fighting for," she said. "Even if you're scared, even if you don't think you're strong enough anymore." She picked up the satellite phone and turned it on. The screen glowed blue in the dim cabin, showing a full battery and a strong signal. Outside, night had fallen, and the temperature was dropping towards 0. Inside, 5 wolves and 1 woman sat by the fire, and for the first time in 30 years, Shiloh Creede was about to reach out to someone beyond her mountain sanctuary. She scrolled through the phone's ancient contact list numbers from a different life, people she'd abandoned without explanation. Most would be disconnected by now. Most of those people probably thought she was dead. But one number might still work. One person might still answer. Marcus Wendell. Her former colleague, her mentor during her early years with Fish and Game, the man who'd taught her how to track wolves and understand their behavior. If anyone would listen, if anyone would help, it would be Marcus. She highlighted his number and stared at it for a long moment. Then, before she could change her mind, she pressed dial. The phone rang 4 times before a voice answered, rough with sleep and confusion. "Hello, Marcus, it's Shiloh Creede." Silence. Then, "Shiloh, Jesus Christ, is this are you? Where are you?" "Idaho, up in the Panhandle. I need to talk to you about something." "Shiloh, it's been 30 years. Everyone thought we thought you were dead. Tom's parents tried to find you. Your daughter tried. I know. I'm sorry. But that's not why I'm calling." She kept her voice steady, focusing on the practical, the immediate. Are you still doing conservation work? Another pause. She could hear Marcus moving, probably sitting up in bed, trying to reconcile the ghost from his past with the voice on the phone. Yes, I left Fish and Game about 10 years ago. I work for a non-profit now, Northern Rockies Wildlife Alliance. We handle legal advocacy, research funding, habitat protection. Why? There's a developer named Garrett Spence buying land in my area. He's running an illegal bounty program on wolves. 500 per pelt. I need to know what can be done about it. Spence. Yeah, I know the name. He's been on our radar for a while. Marcus's voice shifted into professional mode, the shock of hearing from her pushed aside by the immediate problem. But gathering evidence is tricky. He's careful, uses intermediaries, covers his tracks. We've tried building a case before, but without solid proof. I have proof. Or I will. I just need to know who to give it to, how to make it stick. What kind of proof? Shiloh looked at Shadow, at the scars still visible beneath her healing fur. The kind that's hard to argue with. But I need time to document everything properly, and I need to know it won't just disappear into some bureaucrat's filing cabinet. I can help with that. We have contacts at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, DOJ, Environmental Crimes Division, even some sympathetic people at the state level. If you can get me solid evidence, photos, dates, locations, anything linking Spence directly to the bounty program, we can build a case that will hurt him. How long would that take? Depends on what you have. A few weeks to gather everything, maybe a month to coordinate with the right agencies. Why? What's your timeline? Shiloh thought about Roy's warning, about the red marks on his map forming a noose around her territory. I don't know, but I don't think I have long. Shiloh, Marcus's voice softened. Are you safe up there? Do you need help? I'm fine. I've been taking care of myself for a long time. I know you have, but you don't have to do this alone. I can come up, bring some people who... No, not yet. I'll reach out when I have something concrete. Until then, I need you to keep this quiet. No one can know I contacted you. All right. But Shiloh... What? I'm glad you called, even after all this time. I'm glad you're alive. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said, nothing. After a moment, Marcus gave her his direct number and email, made her promise to stay in touch, and ended the call with a warning to be careful. Shiloh turned off the phone and sat in the darkness, listening to the wolves breathe. She'd made contact with the outside world. She'd started something that would force her out of hiding, that would require her to engage with people and systems and consequences she'd been avoiding for 3 decades. The thought terrified her. But in the morning, she woke with purpose, for the first time in years. She had work to do. Over the next week, Shiloh began systematically documenting everything she could find. She ventured out into her territory with a camera she'd kept from her tracking days, photographing survey markers, equipment caches, and signs of recent human activity. She found 3 more wolf kill sites older than the one she'd discovered before, but still identifiable. She photographed the remains, the scattering patterns, the bullet wounds visible in the bones. She started a field journal, noting dates, times, locations, and observations. She recorded the sound of gunshots when she heard them, triangulating their positions on her topographic maps. She documented the systematic pattern of the kills, all in areas that fell within Garrett Spence's intended development corridor. The work consumed her. It felt like her old life, the one she'd walked away from, but different now. Back then, she'd tracked wolves to understand them, to protect them through knowledge and policy. Now she was tracking the people who hunted them, building a case that might actually stop the killing. Shadow recovered fully during this time. The limp disappeared, her wounds healed to pale scars beneath her fur, and her strength returned. She started teaching the pups how to hunt, using the mice that occasionally ventured into the cabin as training targets. Shiloh watched as Shadow demonstrated patience, strategy, the lightning quick strike that separated successful hunters from starving ones. The pups were growing fast. At 5 months old, they'd lost their baby awkwardness and were developing the lean, powerful builds of adolescent wolves. Bandit, the bold one, was already testing boundaries, pushing to see how far he could wander. Whisper remained small but fierce, holding her own in wrestling matches with her larger siblings. Storm was becoming the pack enforcer, disciplining the others when their play got too rough. And Scout watched everything with those patient, intelligent eyes, learning not just from experience, but from observation. Shiloh knew she'd have to let them go soon. They were wild animals, not pets, and keeping them confined to a cabin was cruel, no matter how much she'd grown to care for them. But every time she thought about releasing them back into a forest where people were actively hunting their kind, her resolve wavered. One afternoon, while photographing a fresh kill site about 3 miles from her cabin, Shiloh found something that changed everything. It was a trail camera, hidden in the fork of a Douglas fir, positioned to overlook a game trail. Someone was monitoring this area, documenting what came through. She carefully removed the SD card, replaced it with a blank one from her pack, and continued her survey as if she'd found nothing. But her mind was racing. If someone was running cameras in her territory, they knew more about the local wolf population than she'd thought. They knew patterns, habits, den sites. They were hunting with intelligence and preparation. That night, she downloaded the SD card's contents onto an old laptop she'd kept for emergencies. The files showed hundreds of images spanning the past 3 months. Deer, elk, mountain lions, and wolves. Lots of wolves. The timestamps revealed patterns. A pack of 6 that traveled through every Tuesday and Friday evening, another pack that used this trail only during new moons, lone wolves passing through on irregular schedules. And in 3 images, stamped with dates from the week before Shiloh found Shadow, she saw her. The black she-wolf, healthy and strong, leading her 4 pups along the same trail. The next dated image showed 2 men in hunting gear examining the same spot. The image after that was empty, except for dark stains on the snow. Shiloh stared at those images for a long time. She'd known Shadow was shot deliberately, but seeing the proof, seeing the systematic stalking that had led to it, made it real in a way that hollowed out her chest. She copied all the files, returned the SD card to its camera the next day, and added the evidence to her growing documentation. Every piece brought her closer to having something Marcus could use. Every photograph, every notation, every GPS coordinate added weight to the case against Garrett Spence. But she needed more. She needed something that directly linked Spence to the bounty program, that proved he was ordering the kills rather than just benefiting from them. Without that connection, he could claim ignorance, blame rogue hunters, and walk away clean while the killing continued. Shiloh was considering her options when Roy appeared again, his truck grinding up the mountain on a cold morning in early March. This time, she invited him inside a risk, but one she decided to take. She needed information, and Roy had proven himself trustworthy. He stepped into the cabin and stopped dead, staring at the 5 wolves staring back at him. "Well," he said after a long moment, "that explains the tracks. They needed help. I helped them." Roy nodded slowly, like this made perfect sense. "The black one, she's the wolf Spence's people shot, isn't she? The one they've been looking for." Shiloh's hand moved toward the rifle, leaning against the wall. "Are you going to tell them?" "No," Roy said it simply, without hesitation. "But you should know they're looking. Spence is offering $1,000 for proof of that wolf's death. He's got people combing these mountains, checking every den and cave. They think she died from her wounds, but they want the body to confirm the kill. Why does he care so much about one wolf? Because she's the alpha of the largest pack in the region. Kill her, the pack fragments, and clearing the area gets easier." Roy met her eyes. "He's been asking about you, too." Wants to know who lives up here, whether you own the land, whether you might be a problem. What did you tell him? That you're a crazy old hermit who doesn't bother anyone and doesn't want to be bothered. That seemed to satisfy him for now. Roy pulled a folded paper from his coat. But I found this posted at the trading post yesterday. Thought you should see it. Shiloh unfolded the paper. It was a professionally printed flyer advertising a community meeting about Garrett Spence's development plans scheduled for the following week in the valley below. The language was friendly, promising economic growth and carefully managed environmental stewardship. But at the bottom, in smaller print, was a note about wildlife management strategies and the importance of maintaining appropriate predator-prey balance. He's making it official, Roy said, getting the community on board with wolf removal before anyone can object. Once he has local support, it won't matter what the conservation groups say. Shiloh felt the walls closing in. She had evidence, but not enough. She had allies, but they were too far away. And now Spence was consolidating power, preparing to legitimize the killing she'd been documenting. She looked at Shadow, who sat calmly near the fire, watching the exchange with sharp attention. The wolf had survived impossible odds, healed from wounds that should have killed her, and learned to trust the human who'd saved her life. Shiloh had saved Shadow. Now she needed to save the forest that Shadow called home. "Roy," she said, "how would you feel about helping me stop him?" Roy smiled, a tired expression that held more determination than humor. "I thought you'd never ask." Planning began that night. Roy sat at Shiloh's table with a cup of coffee, while the wolves arranged themselves around the cabin Shadow near the door, the pups in various states of rest and play. The scene would have been absurd under normal circumstances, but these circumstances had stopped being normal the moment Shiloh decided to carry a dying wolf through a blizzard. "Here's what I know," Roy said, spreading out papers he'd brought. "Spence operates through a company called Granite Peak Development. On paper, it's all legitimate environmental impact studies, proper permits, community outreach, but he's got a shadow operation running underneath. Cole Briggs handles it. Ex-military, security contractor, the kind of man who knows how to make problems disappear without leaving evidence. How many people work for him? Briggs? Maybe 6 or 7, that I know of. They pose as hunters, wildlife consultants, land surveyors. They're the ones actually shooting the wolves, planting the cameras, intimidating anyone who might cause trouble. Shiloh studied the papers, property maps, corporate filings, photographs of Spence at various public events. He looked exactly like what he was, a wealthy man in his 60s with silver hair and expensive outdoor gear, someone who could afford to see nature as an investment opportunity rather than something with intrinsic value. "What's his timeline?" she asked. "He's pushing for approval by June. Wants to break ground on the first phase before winter. That gives him about 3 months to clear any obstacles, including wolves and anyone who might protect them." 3 months. It wasn't much time. Shiloh made her decision. "I need to contact Marcus again. Need to accelerate the timeline on building this case. Can you keep feeding me information? Dates, names, anything that connects Spence directly to the bounty program? I can try, but I have to be careful. If Spence finds out I'm helping you, I'll lose my business, maybe worse." "I understand. And Roy, thank you for taking this risk." He shrugged. "I've lived in these mountains all my life. My father hunted here, my grandfather before him. We took what we needed and left the rest alone. Spence wants to turn it all into some playground for rich people who'll spend a weekend pretending to be mountain men before flying back to Seattle. That's not right. Someone has to stand up." After Roy left, Shiloh called Marcus again. This time the conversation was more focused, more strategic. She explained what she had, the trail camera footage, the kill site documentation, the evidence of systematic targeting. Marcus asked detailed questions, taking notes, already formulating how to build a legal case. "This is good," he said. better than I hoped. But we still need something that directly implicates Spence. Right now, we can prove wolves are being killed illegally, but proving he's ordering it is harder. What would you need? Ideally, financial records showing payments to hunters, communications ordering the kills, testimony from someone on the inside. Anything that creates a direct line from Spence to the dead wolves. Shiloh thought about Cole Briggs, about the men Roy had mentioned. Getting testimony from any of them seemed impossible. They had too much to lose. Financial records would be carefully hidden. But communications, what about recorded conversations, she asked. That would work, if they're admissible. But you'd need consent from at least one party in Idaho, which means whoever's recording has to be part of the conversation. It's risky. Everything about this is risky. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Shiloh, I have to ask why now? Why are you doing this after 30 years of staying hidden? She looked at Shadow, at the way the wolf's ears tracked every sound, alert, even in rest. Because I made a choice when I found her. I could have kept walking, kept hiding, kept pretending that nothing beyond my cabin mattered, but I didn't. And once you make that choice, once you decide something is worth saving, you can't just give up when it gets hard. That's the Shiloh I remember. The one who spent 3 weeks tracking a pack through a blizzard because she wanted to prove they weren't killing livestock. The one who testified before the state legislature to protect wolf habitat, even though half the ranchers in Idaho wanted her gone. I'm not that person anymore. Maybe not. But maybe you're becoming her again. After the call, Shiloh sat with that thought. Was she becoming her old self? Or was this someone new? Someone who'd been broken and isolated and was now finding a different kind of strength. She didn't know. But she knew she couldn't stop. The next week brought a warmth spell. The snow began to melt in earnest, revealing the brown earth beneath and turning the forest floor into a maze of mud and running water. Shadow started leading the pups outside for longer periods, teaching them to navigate real terrain, to read the landscape, to understand the forest as something more than a curious place beyond a cabin door. Shiloh watched them from her porch, seeing how Shadow moved with her pack alert but relaxed, protective but encouraging. The pups were learning fast. Bandit was already attempting to hunt squirrels, his technique clumsy but improving. Storm had figured out how to dig for voles beneath the melting snow. Scout and Whisper worked together, coordinating in ways that suggested genuine tactical thinking. They were ready. Or as ready as they'd ever be. One evening, Shiloh sat on her porch and called Shadow over. The wolf approached cautiously, as she always did, maintaining that edge of wildness that meant she'd never be tame. Shiloh placed her hand on Shadow's head, feeling the strong skull, the coarse fur, the warmth of life that had come so close to ending in the snow months ago. "You can't stay here much longer," Shiloh said quietly. "You know that, right? You belong out there, with your pack, in the forest, where you can run and hunt and live the way you're meant to." Shadow's yellow eyes met hers. There was no understanding of words there, but there was understanding of something in tension, emotion, the bond that forms between beings who've survived something together. "But before you go, I need to make sure you'll be safe. I need to make sure Spence and his people can't finish what they started. Can you give me a little more time?" Shadow leaned into her hand, just slightly. A gesture that might have been coincidence but felt like agreement. That night, Shiloh made a call she'd been avoiding. She dialed a number she'd memorized 30 years ago but never used, a number that represented everything she'd run from. It rang 6 times. Then a woman's voice answered, wary and tired. "Hello? Lindsay, it's your mother." The silence that followed was so complete that Shiloh thought the call had dropped. Then, "No. Lindsay, I know you don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to call, but I need to tell you something. You need." Lindsay's voice shook with barely controlled anger. "You disappear for 30 years without a word, and now you need something? I don't care what you need. I don't care if you're dying. You don't get to call me after what you did. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I'm alive, that I'm in Idaho, and that if something happens to me in the next few weeks, there are people who'll contact you. Marcus Wendell, you probably don't remember him, but he worked with me before he has instructions. Why would something happen to you? Because I'm doing something dangerous, something that matters. And I wanted you to know, in case you abandon me, again, in case you get yourself killed and I have to deal with that too? Lindsay's voice broke. You left me. I was 5 years old, and you left me with grandparents who tried their best, but who weren't my mother. Do you have any idea what that did to me? What it's been like living my whole life, knowing my own mother chose to walk away? Shiloh closed her eyes. No, I don't. Because I'm a coward who ran instead of facing what I'd lost. Your father died and I couldn't handle it, couldn't handle the pain, couldn't handle being the mother you deserved. So I left. And there's no excuse for that, no way to make it right. But I need you to know that I thought about you every single day. Every morning when I woke up, every night before I slept, you were always there. Thinking about me didn't help me. Thinking about me didn't show up to my school plays, or teach me to drive, or help me through my first heartbreak. Thinking about me didn't do anything. You're right. It didn't. And I can't fix that. But I'm trying to fix something else now, trying to protect something that can't protect itself. And if I fail, if something happens, I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. That I've always been sorry. That if I could go back and make different choices, I would. Lindsay was crying now, soft sounds that cut deeper than anger. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to feel about you calling after all this time. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to forgive me or understand. I just needed you to hear it. Are you really in danger? Maybe. I don't know. But if I am, it's because I'm trying to do the right thing for once. Another long silence. Then, don't die. Don't you dare call me after 30 years just to tell me you might die. I'll do my best. And Lindsay's voice steadied slightly. If you survive whatever you're doing, if you actually manage not to get yourself killed, call me again. Not because I forgive you, but because maybe I need to understand who you are now, who you became after you left. I will. I promise. After the call ended, Shiloh sat in the darkness for a long time. Shadow came and sat beside her, a warm presence in the cold night. The pups were asleep in a pile near the stove, their breathing deep and even. She'd reconnected with Marcus, she'd allied with Roy, and now she'd spoken to her daughter for the first time in 30 years. The walls she'd built were crumbling, and she was terrified of what that meant. But she was also more alive than she'd been in decades. Shiloh woke to find an envelope wedged under her door. She'd heard nothing during the night, no vehicle, no footsteps, no sound of approach. Whoever had delivered it knew how to move through the forest without disturbing wolves, which meant they were either very skilled or very lucky. She picked up the envelope carefully, checked the windows for any sign of watchers, and only then opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in block letters. They're coming for your wolves. 3 days. Trust no one local. A friend, Shiloh, read it 3 times, her mind racing. Someone knew about Shadow and the pups. Someone knew they were here, hidden in her cabin. But instead of reporting them to Spence for the bounty, this person was warning her. Who and why? She spent the morning in a state of controlled paranoia, checking and rechecking the perimeter of her property, looking for signs of surveillance. It didn't take long to find it a trail camera hidden in a tree about 200 yards from her cabin, positioned to capture anyone approaching or leaving. She examined it without touching, noting the make and model, the fresh batteries, the angle of placement. Someone had been watching her. For how long? She left the camera undisturbed and circled wider, finding 2 more positioned at different approaches to her cabin. All were relatively new installations, probably placed Within the past week, someone had invested serious time and equipment in monitoring her movements, but the cameras only captured approaches. They wouldn't show what happened at the cabin itself, wouldn't reveal the wolves unless someone came close enough to investigate personally. Whoever placed them was building intelligence, preparing for something. The warning note said, 3 days. That meant whoever was planning to come for the wolves would arrive soon, probably with enough force to handle any resistance she might offer. Shiloh needed proof. She needed to know who'd placed the cameras, who was watching, and who'd sent the warning. Without that information, she was operating blind. She returned to her cabin and found the old laptop, pulling up the files from the trail camera she discovered weeks earlier. She studied them again, this time focusing not on the wolves but on the humans. In several images, she could see 2 men, clearly one taller, heavy-set, wearing expensive hunting gear, the other lean and military in his bearing, moving with the efficiency of someone trained for tactical operations. Cole Briggs. She was certain the lean one was Briggs, Spence's head of security. The other man she didn't recognize, but his equipment and posture suggested he was part of the same operation. She copied the images to a flash drive, preparing to send them to Marcus. But first, she needed to check the new cameras around her property. If she could retrieve the SD cards, she might learn who'd been watching and when they planned to act. That afternoon, while Shadow and the pups were ranging through the forest on one of their increasingly long expeditions, Shiloh approached the nearest camera. She climbed the tree carefully, removed the SD card, and was about to replace it with a blank when she noticed something, a tiny scratch mark on the camera's housing, barely visible unless you were looking for it. Someone had opened this camera recently, very recently, based on the freshness of the scratch. She replaced the card and climbed down, her mind working through the implications. If someone had already accessed the camera, they knew she'd found it. They knew she was aware of the surveillance, which meant the game had changed, moved into a new phase where both sides knew the other was watching. Back at the cabin, she loaded the SD card's contents. The files showed her movements over the past week, leaving the cabin, returning, chopping wood, checking her perimeter. And in 3 images from 2 days ago, they showed Roy's truck arriving, Roy entering the cabin, and Roy leaving an hour later. They knew Roy was helping her, which meant Roy was in danger too. She was about to call Roy when she noticed something else in the images. In the background of one shot, barely visible in the tree line, was a figure. Someone had been watching while Roy visited, staying back, observing from a distance. She zoomed in as much as the image quality allowed. The figure was too far away to identify clearly, but she could make out basic details: medium height, lean build, wearing a dark jacket and cap, and in their hands something that looked like a notebook or tablet. Someone had been documenting Roy's visit, building evidence that she wasn't alone, that she had help. But who was this person? Were they working for Spence, or were they the one who'd sent the warning? Shiloh stared at the image for a long time. Then she loaded another set of files, these from earlier in the surveillance period. She scrolled through hundreds of images, watching her own life play out in still frames, routine, isolated, predictable, until she found it. An image from 4 days ago, time-stamped at 3 in the morning. It showed a figure approaching her cabin in darkness, moving carefully, staying low. The infrared camera had captured them clearly, and it was the same person who'd been watching during Roy's visit. But in this image, they were doing something different. They were approaching one of the other cameras, the one positioned on the north approach, and they were doing something to it, tampering with it, adjusting it, maybe disabling it. The next frame, 2 minutes later, showed the same person leaving a small white rectangle on her porch. The envelope. The warning. Shiloh felt the pieces click into place. This person wasn't working for Spence. They were working against him, from the inside, using their access to surveillance equipment to warn her while simultaneously documenting what Spence's operation was doing. But who? She studied the images more carefully, looking for identifying details. In one frame, the figure's sleeve had ridden up slightly, revealing what looked like a tattoo on their forearm. In another, their profile was partially visible, strong jaw, short hair, possibly male but not certain. Then she saw the truck, partially visible in one frame, parked well back from her cabin but identifiable by its distinctive dent in the tailgate. Roy's truck. Shiloh sat back, her mind reeling. Roy had been here at 3 in the morning, placing cameras as part of his job working for Spence, then immediately warning her about what was coming. He'd been playing both sides, maintaining his cover while trying to protect her, and now his cover might be blown. She grabbed the satellite phone and called Roy's number. It rang 8 times before going to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. Shadow and the pups returned just before sunset, the wolves moving with the easy confidence of animals who'd spent hours exploring their territory. Shiloh met them at the door, her mind still racing with implications and dangers. "We need to leave," she told Shadow, knowing the wolf couldn't understand but needing to say it anyway. "They're coming, and we can't be here when they arrive." But even as she said it, she knew running wasn't the answer. Running meant abandoning everything she'd documented, all the evidence she'd gathered. Running meant Spence won, and the killing would continue. She needed a different plan, one that didn't involve flight. She spent the evening organizing her evidence, copying files, uploading them to secure cloud storage, preparing multiple backups. She wrote a detailed summary of everything she knew, everything she'd found, and emailed it to Marcus with instructions to release it publicly if anything happened to her. Then she wrote a shorter message and sent it to the only other person she trusted, Lindsay. It contained her location, a brief explanation of what she was doing, and the access codes for her evidence files. If Spence's people got to her, if 3 days from now ended badly, at least someone would know the truth. Around midnight, she finally reached Roy. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with tension. "Don't come to town," he said before she could speak. "They're watching my place. Briggs knows I warned you. I don't know how, but he knows. Roy, you need to get out. Get somewhere safe. I'm not running. I've lived here my whole life, and I'm not letting Spence chase me off. But you need to know they're coming tomorrow night, not in 3 days. Briggs moved up the timeline. "Tomorrow? I know. I couldn't get word to you any other way. They're bringing 6 men, all armed, planning to sweep your area. They think the wolf is denned up somewhere nearby. They're going to find her, and they're going to find you." Shiloh looked at Shadow, who was watching her with those alert yellow eyes. "Let them come." "Shiloh, I'm not running either, Roy. And I'm not letting them kill these wolves. Not after everything. Then you need help. More than just me and a lawyer 3 states away." "What are you suggesting? Let me make some calls." "There are people in the valley who don't like what Spence is doing, who've been waiting for someone to stand up to him. If I can get them up, there by tomorrow evening. No, I won't put civilians in danger. They're already in danger. Spence is buying up the whole valley, pushing out families who've been here for generations. This isn't just about wolves anymore. It's about whether one rich man gets to decide how everyone else lives." Shiloh was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Okay. But Roy, be careful. If Briggs knows you helped me, I'm always careful. And Shiloh, whatever happens tomorrow, it's been an honor. You're doing right by these animals, by this place. Don't let anyone tell you different." After the call, Shiloh sat with Shadow and the pups, feeling the weight of what was coming. Tomorrow night, armed men would arrive with the intention of killing the wolves she'd saved. She could run, take Shadow and the pups deep into the wilderness, try to disappear again. But running was what she'd been doing for 30 years. Running from grief, from responsibility, from the consequences of her choices. And where had it gotten her? Alone, in a cabin, hidden from the world, disconnected from everything that made life worth living. She'd spent 3 decades learning to not care. Now, finally, she cared about something enough to fight for it. She checked her rifle, made sure she had ammunition, and began preparing her cabin for what might be a very long night. Morning came cold and clear, the kind of day that made the mountains look deceptively peaceful. Shiloh woke before dawn and immediately began preparations. She had perhaps 12 hours before Briggs and his team arrived, and she needed to use every minute. First, the wolves. Shadow seemed to sense something was wrong. She paced the cabin, alert and restless, watching Shiloh with unusual intensity. The pups picked up on their mother's tension and stayed close, their playfulness subdued. "We're going to take a trip," Shiloh told them. "Somewhere safer than here." She'd scouted an escape route weeks ago, a narrow canyon passage that led to protected federal wilderness about 6 miles north. The terrain was difficult, steep, rocky, requiring careful navigation, but it would take the wolves to territory where they'd be legally protected and where Spence's people couldn't follow without serious consequences. The problem was getting them there, while also staying to confront the team that was coming. She needed the wolves safe, but also needed to be here to document what happened, to gather the final evidence that would seal Spence's fate. She spent the morning leading Shadow and the pups through the forest, teaching them the route, showing them landmarks and safe passages. Shadow was a fast learner. She memorized the path after just 2 runs through, her natural navigation instincts filling in what Shiloh couldn't explicitly communicate. By noon, Shiloh was confident Shadow could find the route on her own. The question was whether the wolf would take the pups and go when the time came, or whether she'd stay to protect Shiloh. Wolves were fiercely loyal to their pack, and somehow, over the past months, Shiloh had become part of Shadow's pack. Back at the cabin, Shiloh found Marcus had called 3 times, each message more urgent than the last. She called him back. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "I got your email with all those files. Shiloh, this is incredible. We have enough here to bring federal charges against Spence, maybe even RICO prosecution, if we can prove organized criminal activity. But the attorney I've been working with says we need to move carefully, build an airtight case. We don't have time for careful. Spence's people are coming tonight. They know about the wolves, they know I'm here, and they're planning to eliminate both problems. Then get out, take what you have and leave. We can use what you've gathered to, if I run, they'll just hunt the wolves down another day. And they'll get away with it because no one will be there to witness what they do, to document it, to prove that Spence ordered it. I need to stay. Shiloh, you can't fight 6 armed men by yourself. That's not brave, that's suicide. I'm not by myself, Roy is bringing help. Roy, the trading post guy? What kind of help can he? The kind that's been waiting for someone to stand up to Spence. Look, Marcus, I need you to do something for me. I'm going to be recording everything that happens tonight, audio, video if I can get it. I need you standing by to receive those files the moment I can transmit them. Can you do that? Of course. And I need you to have law enforcement on standby. Federal wildlife officers, state police, whoever has jurisdiction and isn't in Spence's pocket. If things go wrong, if this turns into something worse than I'm planning, someone official needs to be ready to respond. You're scaring me. Good. Be scared. But be ready. Because if I'm right, tonight is going to give you everything you need to stop Spence. Permanently. After the call, Shiloh set up her recording equipment, her old video camera positioned in the window, a digital audio recorder in her pocket, her phone set to livestream to a private cloud account. If anything happened, if Briggs and his men did anything illegal, she'd have proof. Around 2 o'clock, Roy arrived with 3 others, 2 men and a woman, all in their 50s or 60s, all with the weathered look of people who'd spent their lives in the mountains. Roy introduced them quickly. This is Harris and Tom Brennan brothers, 4th-generation ranchers, and this is Leah Pritchard. She runs the feed cooperative in the valley. Everyone here has a problem with Spence. Harris, the older brother, spoke first. Spence has been trying to buy our ranch for 2 years. Made threats when we wouldn't sell. Started rumors about our cattle operation being mismanaged. We're not letting him push us around anymore. Leah nodded. He's trying to force me out of business, undercutting my prices until I can't compete. But I've been here 30 years, and I'm not leaving. If there's a chance to expose what he's really doing, I'm in. Shiloh looked at these people, strangers, who were risking themselves to help her fight a battle that wasn't directly theirs. You understand what might happen tonight? Briggs and his men are professionals. They won't hesitate to use force if they think they need to. We're not looking for a fight, Tom said, but we're not running either. Roy says you have evidence that can take Spence down. We're here to make sure you get that evidence out. They spent the afternoon fortifying the area around the cabin, not building defenses exactly, but positioning themselves strategically, setting up observation points, establishing communication protocols. They had radios, flashlights, cameras, and enough combined mountain experience to navigate the terrain in darkness. Shiloh showed them the escape route she'd prepared for. Wolves, explaining that her priority was getting Shadow and the pups to safety before dealing with Briggs. You care about those wolves more than your own safety, Leah observed. They didn't ask to be part of this. I did. There's a difference. As the sun began setting, Shiloh gathered the wolves one last time. She knelt beside Shadow, placing her hand on the wolf's broad head. Listen to me. When the trouble starts tonight, you take your pups and you run. Follow the route I showed you. Don't stop. Don't look back. Get to the safe territory and stay there. You understand? Shadow's yellow eyes held hers. For a moment, the wolf seemed almost human in her intelligence, her awareness of what was being asked. Then she licked Shiloh's hand once, gently, and turned to gather her pups. Shiloh watched them disappear into the trees, heading toward the canyon passage. She had no way of knowing if Shadow would actually follow through, if she'd keep going when the violence started, or if she'd turn back to defend the human who'd saved her life. But she had to hope. Hope that Shadow's instincts as a mother would override her loyalty, that protecting her pups would matter more than protecting Shiloh. By 8 o'clock, full darkness had fallen. The temperature dropped to near zero. Everyone was in position, Roy and the Brennan brothers watching the southern approaches, Leah monitoring the eastern ridge, Shiloh at the cabin with her recording equipment running. They waited. At 9:30, Shiloh's radio crackled. Tom's voice, barely above a whisper. I've got movement. 3 vehicles, lights off, coming up the old logging road. Maybe 2 miles out. Copy that, Shiloh responded. Everyone stay quiet. Stay hidden. Let them commit. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. This was it. Everything she'd been preparing for, everything she'd been afraid of, converging on this cold mountain night. She checked her rifle one last time, made sure all her recording devices were active, and positioned herself where she could see the approaches to her cabin. In the distance, she heard engines cutting off, doors closing quietly, the soft crunch of boots on frozen ground. They were coming. Shiloh thought about Lindsay, about the phone call where she'd promised not to die. She thought about Marcus, waiting by his phone for evidence that might never come. She thought about Shadow and the pups, hopefully miles away by now, running towards safety and freedom. And she thought about the person she'd been 30 years ago, the woman who fought for wolves when no one else would, who stood up to powerful interests because it was right, who believed that one person could make a difference. Maybe she could be that person again. Maybe she'd never stopped being her, just buried her under years of fear and regret. The radio crackled again. Roy's voice, 6 men all armed, spreading out to surround your position. Briggs is leading them. They're not bothering with stealth anymore. Let them come, Shiloh said. We're ready. And in that moment, she realized she was. After 30 years of hiding, she was finally ready to stand her ground and fight for something that mattered. The wolves were safe, the evidence was recorded, her allies were in position. Now all she had to do was survive the next few hours. The first sign of Briggs's team was a flashlight beam cutting through the trees, sweeping methodically across the terrain. Shiloh watched from her window as 6 figures emerged from the forest, moving in a tactical formation that spoke of military training. They weren't bothering with subtlety anymore. They knew she was here, and they were prepared for resistance. Cole Briggs led from the center, a tall man moving with economical precision. He raised a hand, and the team stopped, fanning out to encircle the cabin from multiple angles. One man moved toward the small shed behind the cabin, another toward the woodpile, cutting off potential escape routes. Shiloh activated her radio. "They're in position. Everyone stay down until I give the signal." She stepped out onto her porch, rifle held loosely at her side, not threatening but not defenseless either. The recording equipment in her pocket was running, capturing audio. The camera in the window was filming everything. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she called out. Briggs stopped about 30 yards away. "Mrs. Creede, we're here on behalf of Granite Peak Development. We've had reports of dangerous wildlife in this area. We're authorized to conduct a removal operation." "Authorized by who? There's no hunting season active, and this is national forest land." "We have the appropriate permits." Briggs pulled a paper from his jacket. "Wildlife management exception, signed by the regional supervisor. You're welcome to review it. I'm sure it looks very official. I'm also sure it's worthless, since the regional supervisor doesn't have authority to override federal protections for endangered species." Briggs's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, we're not here to debate regulations. We've been tracking a dangerous wolf that attacked livestock in the valley. Trail evidence suggests it's denned somewhere on your property. We need to search the area." "You mean the black she-wolf one of your men shot 3 months ago, the one you've been offering $1,000 bounty for? That wolf?" Now Briggs showed interest. "You've seen it? I found her bleeding in the snow. Took 3 buckshot rounds meant to kill her. Barely survived. Where is she now?" "Gone. Healed up and moved on weeks ago. You're wasting your time here." Briggs studied her for a long moment. Then he gestured to his men. "Search the area, check the cabin, the outbuildings, anywhere a wolf might den. You don't have permission to search my property. You don't own this property, Mrs. Creede. It's public land, which means we have every right to conduct authorized wildlife management operations." 2 men moved toward the cabin. Shiloh raised her rifle slightly, not aiming but making her position clear. "First man through that door answers to this rifle." The men stopped. Briggs sighed, like this was a tedious inconvenience. "Mrs. Creede, threatening federal contractors is a serious crime. You don't want to do this." "Federal contractors? Is that what you're calling yourselves? Because I've been documenting your operation for weeks. I know about the illegal bounty program. I know about the systematic wolf killings. I know Garrett Spence is funding all of it to clear the area for his development project. And I've got proof photographs, GPS coordinates, trail camera footage showing your men hunting protected wildlife." Briggs's expression hardened. "Those are serious accusations." "They're not accusations, they're facts. And they're currently sitting on servers in 3 different states, with instructions to release everything to federal authorities and the media if anything happens to me. So here's what's going to happen. You and your men are going to leave. The wolves are gone. There's nothing for you to find. And if you trespass on my property or threaten me in any way, you'll be doing it on camera." She pulled out her phone and held it up so they could see the recording light. "Every word you've said tonight is documented. Every action. If you want to dig yourself deeper, keep talking." Briggs was silent, calculating. Then he pulled out his own phone and stepped away, speaking too quietly for Shiloh to hear. She didn't need to hear. She knew he was calling Spence, getting new instructions, deciding whether she was a problem worth escalating. While he talked, Shiloh became aware of movement in the forest behind the cabin. Shadow. The wolf hadn't gone to the safe territory after all. She'd circled back, drawn by the threat to Shiloh, her pack instincts overriding the escape plan. No, Shiloh thought, desperately. Take the pups and run. Don't throw away your chance because of me. But Shadow moved closer, a dark silhouette barely visible in the trees, and Shiloh knew the wolf wasn't leaving. They'd saved each other once. Now Shadow was prepared to fight for the human who'd become part of her pack. Briggs finished his call and walked back. His expression had changed harder now, more resolved. "Mr. Spence has asked me to offer you a settlement, $50,000. You pack up, leave this area, and forget everything you think you saw. In exchange, the development proceeds without any legal complications, and you get to start over somewhere else. Somewhere comfortable. Tell Spence he can take his $50,000 and think carefully before you answer, because if you refuse, things get complicated. For you, for the people helping you, for anyone who thinks they can interfere with legitimate business operations. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You're one woman, living alone in a cabin with no legal claim to this land. Spence has lawyers, political connections, and resources you can't match. You fight this, you lose everything. Take the money and walk away." Shiloh lowered her rifle, letting it hang at her side. "You know what I learned in 30 years living alone up here? Money doesn't buy peace. Running doesn't solve problems. And sometimes the only way to live with yourself is to stand for something, even when it's hard." "So that's a no?" "That's a hell no." Briggs nodded, like he'd expected this answer. "Then we have a problem." He raised his hand, and his men began moving again, not toward the cabin this time, but spreading out, searching the forest. They were looking for the wolves, and they weren't planning to stop until they found them. Shiloh triggered her radio. Now, lights blazed to life from multiple positions around her property, Roy and his allies activating high-powered flashlights and flood lamps they'd positioned earlier. Suddenly, the entire area was lit up like a stage, and Briggs's men were exposed, caught in the open. "What the—" One of the men raised his hand to shield his eyes. Roy's voice called out from the southern position. "Evening, Cole. Funny meeting you up here. Thought you boys only worked during business hours." Harris Brennan stepped out from the eastern ridge, camera in hand. "I'm recording everything, gentlemen. Every face, every weapon, every word. So let's keep this professional." Briggs spun, trying to locate all the voices. "Who's there? Show yourselves." "Just concerned citizens," Leah called from another position. "Making sure wildlife management operations follow proper protocol. You do have all the proper permits, don't you?" Briggs's team had drawn their weapons, but they had no clear targets, just voices and lights coming from multiple directions. They were outmaneuvered, outnumbered by witnesses, and thoroughly documented. "This is private business," Briggs said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You people need to leave before someone gets hurt." "Funny thing about public land," Roy replied. "It's public. We've got just as much right to be here as you do. More, actually, since we're not hunting endangered species illegally." One of Briggs's men shifted position, bringing his rifle around toward Roy's voice. Shadow chose that moment to move, breaking from cover with a warning growl that froze everyone in place. The wolf stood in the clearing between Shiloh's cabin and Briggs's team, her black fur catching the floodlights, her yellow eyes reflecting the beams like mirrors. She looked massive, dangerous, every inch the apex predator that people had feared and hunted for centuries. "There," one of Briggs's men said, raising his weapon. "The target." "Don't," Shiloh warned, bringing her own rifle up. "You shoot that wolf, I shoot you. See how that plays in court when there's video evidence. She's threatening us. She's protecting her territory. There's a difference, and every person here will testify that your team came armed into the forest, hunting protected wildlife, threatening a civilian. How do you think that investigation goes?" Briggs stared at Shadow, then at Shiloh, then at the lights surrounding his position. He was calculating odds, weighing options, trying to find a way to salvage the situation. "This isn't over," he finally said. "You're right, it's not. Because tomorrow morning, every piece of evidence I've gathered goes to federal wildlife enforcement. Your operation is finished, Briggs. Spence is finished. You can shoot me, shoot the wolf, shoot everyone here, but that doesn't change what's already in motion." Briggs made his decision. He lowered his hand. "Fall back. Everyone fall back to the vehicles." His men hesitated, clearly wanting to argue, but Briggs was already moving toward the tree line. One by one they followed, backing away while keeping their weapons ready. Shadow watched them go, her body tense, ready to attack if any of them made a threatening move. But they kept backing up and finally disappeared into the darkness. Shiloh didn't lower her rifle until she heard engines starting, heard the vehicles grinding back down the mountain. Only then did she let herself breathe. The vehicle's engine sounds faded into the distance, but Shiloh knew better than to relax. Briggs had backed down tonight because he was outmaneuvered and documented, but men like him didn't just give up. They regrouped, adapted, found new angles of attack. Roy and the others emerged from their positions, converging on the cabin. Harris was grinning despite the tension. "Did you see their faces when all those lights came on? Priceless." "We got everything," Leah said, holding up her camera. "Clear footage of all 6 men, their weapons, Briggs making threats. This is exactly what we needed." Shiloh was only half listening. She was watching Shadow, who remained in the clearing, alert and focused on the direction Briggs's team had gone. The wolf knew something wasn't right. Animals had better instincts for danger than humans. "They'll be back," Shiloh said. "Maybe not tonight, but soon. Briggs won't report this to Spence as a loss. He'll report it as a temporary setback, and they'll come up with a new plan. Then we get law enforcement up here before they can try again," Tom suggested. "Call the federal people, show them the evidence, get protection. That takes time. Paperwork, jurisdiction questions, bureaucracy. We might have hours, maybe a day." "Not enough." Her radio crackled. It was Roy's frequency, but the voice wasn't Roy's. It was Briggs. "Mrs. Creede, I hope you're listening. I want you to know I respect what you did tonight. You outplayed us tactically. But the game isn't over. Right now, my men are repositioning. We've identified 3 of your allies by their voices. We know where they live, where their families are. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call off your little resistance group, delete all the footage from tonight, and let us finish our job. Or tomorrow morning, your friends start experiencing problems. House fires, accidents, the kind of tragedies that happen in rural areas all the time. Your choice." The radio went silent. Roy swore softly. "He's bluffing. Has to be." "Maybe," Shiloh said. "But are you willing to bet your life on that? Your homes, your families?" Leah's face had gone pale. "I have grandchildren staying with me this week. If Spence's people, they won't," Shiloh said, though she wasn't certain. "But you all need to leave. Get back to town. Make sure your families are safe. I'll handle this." "Handle it how?" Harris demanded. "You can't fight them alone." "I'm not planning to fight them. I'm planning to end this." She pulled out her satellite phone. "I'm calling in the cavalry. The real kind." She dialed Marcus's number. He answered. "Immediately. Please tell me you're safe. For now. But I need those federal contacts you mentioned, and I need them here by morning. Can you make that happen?" "I can try. But Shiloh, federal agents don't just drop everything and rush to remote Idaho because someone asks. I need to give them something concrete, something that justifies immediate action. How about attempted murder of a federal witness? Briggs just threatened to burn down houses if we don't back off. I've got it recorded." "That might do it. Send me the audio file right now. I'll start making calls." While Shiloh transferred the file, Shadow suddenly went rigid, her ears forward, her body tense. She was staring at the northern approach, where the canyon passage led to the safe territory. The pups. Shiloh felt ice in her chest. No, they wouldn't. But even as she said it, she knew they would. Briggs had figured out the only leverage that would actually work on her. Not threatening her friends, not threatening her, threatening the wolves she'd risked everything to save. She grabbed her rifle and started running toward the canyon passage, Shadow racing ahead of her. Behind her, Roy called out, but she didn't stop. If Briggs's men had found the pups, if they'd cut off the escape route, the flashlight beam caught them 200 yards into the forest. 4 wolf pups, confused and frightened, surrounded by 2 of Briggs's men. One man had his rifle trained on the pups, finger on the trigger. "That's far enough," he called when he saw Shiloh approaching. "Drop the rifle, or I start shooting." Shiloh stopped, breathing hard from the run. Shadow had stopped too, every muscle coiled to attack, but smart enough to know she couldn't reach the men before they shot her pups. "Let them go," Shiloh said. "They're just babies. They haven't done anything to you. They're leverage. Boss wants you to understand how serious we are. Delete your evidence, call off your friends, and these wolves live. Refuse, and we kill them right here. You're on camera right now. Everything you're doing is being recorded. You kill these wolves, you're confessing to federal crimes. Then I guess you better make the right choice." Time seemed to stretch. Shiloh looked at the pups, Bandit, Whisper, Storm, Scout huddled together, scared but trying to be brave. She looked at Shadow, who was watching her with those intelligent yellow eyes, waiting to see what the human would do. She thought about 30 years of hiding, of choosing safety over courage, of walking away from everything that mattered. She thought about her daughter, about the promise she'd made not to die tonight. She thought about the person she'd been and the person she might still become. Then she heard it. Distant, but unmistakable. Helicopter rotors, coming fast from the south. The man with the rifle heard it too. He looked up, trying to locate the source. "What is that?" Shiloh smiled. "That's the sound of you boys being in a lot of trouble." The helicopter came over the ridge with searchlights blazing, turning night into day. Behind it, she could hear more vehicles approaching, multiple engines, official sirens, the cavalry arriving faster than she dared hope. Marcus must have pulled strings, called in favors, made it clear that time was critical. And somehow, impossibly, he'd gotten federal agents mobilized and moving in less than an hour. The men holding the pups froze, trapped between the rifle they were holding and the helicopter spotlight, turning them into perfect targets. Shiloh saw the moment they realized the game was over, saw them lower their weapons and step back from the pups. Shadow didn't wait. She bolted forward, placing herself between her pups and the men, gathering them close and moving them back toward Shiloh. The helicopter was landing in a clearing 50 yards away, and Shiloh could see vehicles converging on the area, official trucks with government plates, men in tactical gear with U.S. Fish and Wildlife emblazoned on their backs. Briggs's men were surrounded, outnumbered, and thoroughly caught. One of the federal agents approached Shiloh, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mrs. Creede, I'm Special Agent Kim Torres, Fish and Wildlife Service. We got a call about poaching activity and threats against a federal witness. Marcus Wendell vouched for you. He said you have evidence?" Shiloh pulled out her phone and the flash drives she'd prepared. "Everything you need. Trail camera footage, kill site documentation, GPS coordinates, financial records linking Garrett Spence to an illegal bounty program. And as of tonight, recordings of his people making threats and attempting to kill endangered species." Agent Torres took the drives. "This is solid work. How long have you been documenting this?" 3 months, since I found a dying wolf shot by Spence's hunters." Torres looked at Shadow and the pups, now safe behind Shiloh. "That her? That's her. She's beautiful. Lucky she found you. I think I'm the lucky one." Over the next hour, federal agents arrested Briggs's men, secured the area, and began processing the scene. Roy and the others gave statements. Footage was reviewed, evidence catalogued, charges prepared. Shiloh sat on her porch with Shadow and the pups, watching it all unfold. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, but also strangely at peace. She'd done it. She'd stood her ground, protected what mattered, and maybe, just maybe, made a difference. Agent Torres came back as dawn was breaking. "We're wrapping up here. We'll need you to come in for a formal statement, but based on what we've seen, this is going to be a major case. Multiple federal violations, organized poaching, conspiracy. Spence is going to face serious charges." "What about the wolves?" "They're safe. We're going to monitor the area, make sure no more hunting happens, and let the demented population recover naturally." "You did good, Mrs. Creede. You probably saved the entire wolf population in this region." After the agents left, after Roy and the others had gone home, Shiloh stood in her clearing and watched the sunrise. Shadow sat beside her, the pups exploring the area now that the danger had passed. "You can go now," Shiloh told the wolf. "Take your family to the safe territory, live the life you're meant to live. You're free." Shadow looked at her for a long moment. Then the wolf stood, gathered her pups with a low bark, and began moving toward the canyon passage. This time, she didn't stop. She kept going, leading her family toward wilderness and safety and everything wolves needed. But at the edge of the tree line, Shadow paused. She turned back once, meeting Shiloh's eyes across the clearing. It wasn't goodbye. Wolves didn't think in those terms. It was acknowledgement, recognition, the understanding that passes between beings who've survived something together. Then Shadow turned and disappeared into the forest, her pups following, and Shiloh was alone again. But it was a different kind of alone than before. Not isolation, not hiding, just solitude, chosen rather than imposed. And somehow, that made all the difference. 3 months later, spring had transformed the Idaho mountains. The snow had melted completely, revealing ground thick with new growth. Wildflowers dotted the meadows, and the forest hummed with the sounds of birds and insects and life returning after winter's dormancy. Shiloh sat on her porch, watching the morning sun climb over the eastern ridge. Her coffee had gone cold while she read through the legal documents. Marcus had sent the formal charges against Garrett Spence, Cole Briggs, and 4 others involved in the illegal bounty program. Federal prosecutors were building a comprehensive case, and based on the evidence Shiloh had gathered, they expected multiple convictions. Spence's development project was dead. The land exchange had been rejected, his political connections had evaporated once the scope of his crimes became public, and Granite Peak Development was facing bankruptcy. The man who'd tried to reshape the mountains to fit his vision of profit was learning that some things couldn't be bought or manipulated. More importantly, the federal government had designated the entire region as critical wolf habitat, providing protection that would last for decades. No more bounties, no more legal loopholes, no more systematic killing. The wolves were safe. Roy's truck appeared on the old logging road, right on schedule. He'd been coming by once a week, partly to bring supplies, partly to check on her, partly because they'd become something like friends through everything that had happened. He climbed out with a box of groceries and a rolled-up newspaper. "Morning. Got your regular order. Plus I threw in some fresh eggs from Leah's chickens." She says, "Hello, by the way. How's she doing?" "Good. Business is booming now that Spence is out of the picture. Turns out a lot of folks appreciate someone who'll stand up to bullies." He handed her the newspaper. "You made the front page again." Shiloh unrolled it and sighed. The headline read, "Mountain Woman's Evidence Brings Down Poaching Ring." There was a photo of her testifying at a preliminary hearing, looking uncomfortable in the only dress shirt she owned. "I told them I didn't want publicity." "Doesn't work that way. You're a hero whether you like it or not." Roy grinned. "Though I heard through the grapevine that some conservation groups want to hire you as a consultant, pay you to do what you've been doing anyway. Tracking wolves, documenting populations, protecting habitat. I'm not looking for a job. Maybe not. But you're looking for purpose. I can see it. You've been different since everything went down. More engaged, more present. Like you finally figured out that hiding from the world doesn't make you safe. It just makes you alone. He was right, though she wouldn't admit it out loud. Something had changed in her during those tense days of gathering evidence and confronting Briggs. She'd reconnected with the part of herself that believed in fighting for things, in standing up even when it was hard, in being part of something larger than her own survival. After Roy left, Shiloh took a walk through her territory. She'd been making these circuits daily, checking the forest, noting signs of animal activity, documenting what she found. Not for any official purpose, just because she couldn't help herself. 30 years of isolation hadn't erased her love of this work, it had just buried it under layers of fear and grief. She found wolf tracks near the creek, fresh from this morning. Large ones, Shadow's size, and 4 smaller sets following. The pack was staying in the area, hunting the protected territory, thriving. Shiloh followed the tracks for a while, reading the story. They told a successful hunt, playful wrestling between pups, the confident stride of a healthy alpha female. Shadow had survived. Her pups were growing strong. They'd get through another winter, establish their own territories eventually, maybe form their own packs. The wolves would persist, adapt, endure the way they always had when given half a chance. Shiloh returned to her cabin to find she had a visitor. Not Roy this time, but a woman in her 30s, sitting on the porch steps, looking nervous and determined in equal measure. Lindsay. Shiloh stopped, her breath catching. Her daughter had changed completely from the 5-year-old she'd abandoned, grown into a woman with her father's strong features and an expression that held years of hurt and anger and confusion. "Hi," Lindsay said, standing awkwardly. "I hope it's okay that I came. You said to call if you survived, and when you didn't call, I figured I'd come see for myself." "I'm glad you did." The voice was rough. "How did you find the place?" "Marcus gave me directions. He's been keeping me updated on everything, the trial, the charges, what you did to stop those people. He said you were a hero." "I'm not a hero. I just did what needed doing. That's what heroes say." Lindsay looked around at the clearing, the cabin, the forest. "So this is where you've been hiding all these years?" "Yes. This is where I ran to when I should have stayed and been your mother." "Why didn't you? Why leave like that?" Shiloh sat down on the porch steps, and after a moment, Lindsay sat beside her. "Not close, but not far either. Because I was broken. Your father died and something in me shattered. I couldn't handle the pain, couldn't handle seeing you and being reminded of everything I'd lost. So I ran. And once I started running, I didn't know how to stop. You could have come back. Any time in 30 years you could have tried. I know. And I didn't. Because I was a coward. I convinced myself you were better off without me, that I'd just cause you more pain if I came back. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. Not you. I was choosing the easy path of isolation over the hard path of being present." Lindsay was quiet for a long time. "Then, I hated you. For years I hated you so much. But then, I had my own life fall apart. Divorce, job loss, health problems, and I started understanding how tempting it is to just walk away. To start over somewhere no one knows you, somewhere your failures don't follow. I never did it, but I understood the impulse. Did you really have all that happen? No, but I could have. And that's the point. We all have moments where we want to run. You actually did it. For 30 years. And now you're trying to make up for it by saving wolves and fighting developers and doing things that might have gotten you killed. I wasn't trying to make up for anything. I was just..." Shiloh stopped, considering. "Maybe I was, maybe. Part of why I fought so hard for those wolves was because they gave me something I could actually save, after failing to save so many other things. Did it help? Fighting for them? Yes. It reminded me that running doesn't solve anything, that hiding from pain just makes you smaller, that the only way to heal is to face what you've done and try to do better. They sat in silence, watching the forest. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals in the warming air. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker hammered against a dead tree, the sound echoing through the mountains. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Lindsay finally said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I think I want to try knowing you. Understanding who you are now, not just who you were when you left. I'd like that. If you're willing, I am. But it's going to take time, and effort, and honesty. I can do that." Lindsay stood to leave, then paused. "Marcus said you saved a wolf family, that they were dying and you brought them back to life, kept them safe until they could survive on their own. Is that true?" "More or less. Why'd you do it? Why risk everything for animals you barely knew?" Shiloh thought about Shadow's eyes meeting hers in that snowy clearing, about the trust that had built between human and wolf, about how saving something else had somehow begun saving herself. "Because sometimes the things we save end up saving us right back," she said. "And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to start over. Get a second chance to be the person we should have been all along." Lindsay nodded slowly. "I'll call you. In a few days. We'll figure out what comes next. I'll be here." After Lindsay left, Shiloh sat on her porch until evening, watching the light change across the mountains. She heard wolves howling in the distance, Shadow's pack marking territory, communicating with other packs, claiming their place in the forest. The sound didn't make her sad anymore. It made her hopeful. She'd spent 30 years learning to be alone, learning to not need anything or anyone, building walls between herself and the world. And in 3 short months, those walls had come crashing down because of wolves that needed saving, people who needed help, and a daughter who needed answers. She wasn't fixed. She wasn't healed. There was too much damage, too many years of isolation to undo. But she was trying. She was present. She was engaged with life again instead of just surviving it, and maybe that was enough. Maybe redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about choosing differently in the future. About standing up when it mattered, protecting what was vulnerable, and staying connected to the people and places that made life meaningful. The sun set behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Night came softly to the mountains, bringing with it the sounds and smells of wilderness, pine, sap, and cold streams, and the endless whisper of wind through trees. Shiloh went inside her cabin, lit the lamps, and sat by the fire. Tomorrow, she'd call Marcus about the consulting work. She'd reach out to Lindsay and see if they could have coffee next time she was near a town. She'd continue documenting wolf activity in her territory, not because anyone was paying her, but because it mattered. She'd keep living, keep trying, keep fighting for the things that deserved protecting. Because 30 years ago, she'd learned how to survive alone. But 3 months ago, she'd learned something more important, that survival wasn't enough, that isolation wasn't safety, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself care about something, even knowing you might lose it. She'd saved a dying wolf family, and in doing so, she'd saved herself. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough to start building a life that was about more than just hiding from pain, enough to believe that second chances were real, that redemption was possible, and that even after 30 years of running, you could still find your way home.